The secret behind why the Jedi never appear to have recruited Sith Purebloods and Rakata reveals something deeper about how the Order protected the galaxy from the dark side's influence. Pulling from 4 Legends continuity sources: Star Wars Tales of the Jedi Companion, the Old Republic, Revan, the Knights of the Old Republic Campaign Guide, and Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, we break down 10 reasons that made it virtually impossible for these 2 species to ever appear within the Jedi Order, even with their inherent Force connection. The first reason the Jedi never recruited from these species stems from their fundamental opposition to Jedi principles. What made Sith Purebloods different was that they weren't just another Force-sensitive species. Their entire biology pulled them toward the dark side like a magnet pulls iron. For the Sith species, this wasn't a temptation, but their very nature. The Jedi way devoted itself to mastering the light side of the Force, and was built on controlling emotions, embracing peace, and seeking knowledge and serenity, while turning from passion and chaos. In direct contrast, the dark side was described as actively drawing the wicked, evil, the weak-willed, and the power-hungry into its grasp. It offered self-gain, egoism, and convenience, directly crossing the boundary that the Jedi maintained with absolute dedication. Both the Kisai and Massassi, the 2 primary subspecies that originated from the Sith homeworld of Korriban, were generally seen as being strong in the dark side of the Force. This wasn't learned behavior or cultural influence alone. Their blood carried the legacy of dozens of millennia of dark side evolution. The vast knowledge and ancient Sith techniques were preserved within their massive temples and structures, passed down through generations of pure Sith blood. Within Sith society, Force sensitivity marked the elite. Those blessed with the Force rose above the lower ranks of Imperial society, which was built entirely on the foundation of the dark side. But the reality behind this is far more unsettling. In Sith society, a pureblood born without any connection to the Force was considered an abomination, an existence that, by tradition, could not be allowed to continue. This cultural practice had profound implications for the Jedi. Any Sith pureblood who lived long enough to be considered for recruitment had already been shaped by a civilization that eliminated those who could not embrace the dark side. Their survival alone meant that they had been raised within a worldview defined by brutality, power, and fear, making them fundamentally incompatible with the principles of the Jedi Order. Another reason centers on how inherently dangerous the dark side itself was by nature. The lore of the dark side was characterized as powerful and dangerously easy to rush into, tempting even the strong. Individuals were warned against a tendency to seek the easy path to power, as empowering such weak souls could lead to dangerous consequences. Training Force sensitives meant constantly watching for those who lacked the will to resist the dark side's temptations. That path didn't offer a gradual descent, but a cliff edge that even strong-willed individuals could stumble over in moments of weakness or desperation. For a species that had no cultural or biological resistance to that pull, the danger multiplied exponentially. Among all Sith subspecies, the Massassi embodied everything the Jedi stood against. They were fearsome, ruthless, and efficient soldiers who lacked respect for Jedi or Republic standards. Their violent and ruthless nature wasn't something that could be trained away. It was woven into who they were as a people. The Massassi had been bred and shaped over countless generations to serve as warriors for the Sith Lords, and that purpose had become inseparable from their identity. They maintained their traditional military organization and weapons systems, rather than adopting any philosophies that contradicted their warrior heritage. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order devoted itself to mastering the light side through controlling emotions, embracing peace, and seeking knowledge and serenity. The dark side offered the exact opposite: self-gain, egoism, and convenience. These paths didn't just diverge, but opposed each other at every fundamental level. Jedi Masters understood this threat intimately. They made efforts to destroy Sith talismans specifically to prevent them from falling into the hands of uninitiated Force users or power-hungry dark side followers. The third reason centers on the deep connection to Sith power and lore that the species maintained. Sith teachings that came back to the galaxy were purposefully aimed at power-hungry individuals. The deep connection of the Sith species to the dark side was shown in the discovery that the vast knowledge and evolution of ancient Sith techniques derived from pure Sith blood over dozens of millennia were preserved within their massive structures and temples. The legacy remained alive in every stone they laid, every generation born, and every memory passed down across lifespans that most galactic powers couldn't match. Training Force sensitives required constantly watching for those who lacked the will to resist the dark side's temptations. But the Sith species had evolved over millennia without building that resistance. They had built temples to its power instead. Every stone in those temples had been laid by hands guided by dark side philosophy, and every technique preserved within them had been refined through generations of practitioners who saw the dark side not as corruption, but as the natural order of power. Fourth on the list was the Jedi's recruitment vetting process, which was meticulous by necessity. The Jedi required careful monitoring of all potential recruits, especially apprentices, to ensure they did not seek out the quick, seductive, and corrupting advantages of the dark side. As a rule, rather than an absolute law, the Jedi avoided recruiting individuals already steeped in dark side traditions. They had to devote their training to the light side, as a person who committed to the dark side lost their innate self and became immersed in the dark, suffering penalties that fundamentally changed who they were. And the Jedi had good reasons for maintaining such strict standards. Centuries of experience had taught them that Force training could turn dangerous faster than anyone expected. Every apprentice was constantly monitored for signs of dark side temptation, while masters devoted years to training each Padawan, watching for weakness and nurturing strength. This system worked because it started with candidates who had a genuine chance of succeeding. Starting with Sith Purebloods would be like building a house on quicksand, where the foundation was wrong from the beginning. This empire had been built by Darksiders who fled after suffering defeat in an ancient civil war against the Jedi, and they dedicated their new society to ruling through ambition and strength. Jedi philosophy had always warned that ambition led inevitably to the dark side of the Force, and the entire Sith civilization validated these warnings through their actions. Fifth on the list of reasons preventing their recruitment was the fundamental opposition and ideological divide between these civilizations. Sith society represented a civilization built on ruling through ambition, the very trait that Jedi teachings warned led directly to the dark side of the Force. By contrast, the Jedi were the Republic's guardians, charged with the responsibility of keeping the peace throughout known space, making conflict inevitable when confronted with an empire built entirely on opposing principles, making conflict not just possible, but inevitable. These weren't minor skirmishes or border disputes. These were existential struggles that shaped galactic history and cost millions of lives on both sides. After the Great Hyperspace War, the Sith species vanished from Republic space for over 1,000 years. They existed in separate, hostile spheres from the Jedi and the Republic. When a Sith Pureblood finally appeared in Republic territory, their physical features made them immediately identifiable. Red skin and dangling cheek tendrils marked them as clearly as a uniform. Any Jedi who encountered one would recognize them instantly as members of the enemy civilization, especially since their presence in Republic space had been absent for over 1,000 years. How could the Jedi recruit from a species that saw them as ancient enemies? That ideological gap was too wide, and the historical blood between them ran too deep. And the ongoing war made any attempt at recruitment not just impossible, but potentially a betrayal of the Republic the Jedi served. As a seventh reason, the exiled history of the Sith civilization created a gap that could never be crossed. Defeated Darksiders had fled the Republic to build their own civilization, forming what became the Sith Empire. When Jedi Master Revan investigated the Sith Empire, he learned that the Sith species had vanished from Republic space after the Great Hyperspace War, indicating the two factions existed in separate, hostile spheres. This wasn't a peaceful separation or cultural divergence, but the result of war, exile, and centuries of animosity that had hardened into absolute opposition. Darksiders who founded the Sith Empire hadn't left seeking a new path. They had fled after defeat, carrying their hatred with them, and building a civilization designed to oppose everything the Jedi represented. On the other hand, the Rakata presented a completely different problem, one that went beyond ideology or culture. These ancient builders of the infinite empire had lost their connection to the Force itself. The eighth reason applies specifically to the Rakata and centers on their Force blindness. The Rakata possessed the Force-blind species trait, meaning they had lost their connection to the Force. Their extinction was not caused by the destruction of the Starforge. According to Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, the Rakata were already on the verge of extinction when Revan discovered them, and their tiny population could no longer sustain a viable gene pool. The Starforge's destruction shut down the temple's defenses and contributed to Lihan's isolation. But the gene pool collapse is the canon reason the species died out. This fundamental biological limitation prevented them from taking the Force sensitivity feat, which meant they could not be trained as traditional Jedi. Training someone in the Force became impossible when they could no longer sense or access it. The Rakata had once wielded the Force to build an empire that spanned the galaxy, but the loss of the Starforge severed that connection permanently. In the distant past, the Rakata had been darkside Force users, but by the era covered in our sources, they were entirely Force blind. No meditation technique or training regimen could restore what was no longer there. This wasn't a matter of weak connection or untrained potential. The connection was simply gone, lost at a level so fundamental that it became a defining trait of the species itself. This Force-blind trait wasn't temporary or conditional, but absolute. Where other species might have individuals with varying degrees of Force sensitivity, every Rakata shared this same limitation. The Jedi could no more train a Rakata in the Force than they could teach a blind person to see through meditation alone. But even if the Rakata could somehow regain their Force connection, their culture posed serious obstacles. The ninth reason involves the violent culture and rage that characterized Rakata society. Rakata culture was noted for its violence and primitive nature. They possessed a species trait linked to rage, allowing them to enter a rage once per day as a swift action. This wasn't a matter of individual temperament or poor socialization. The capacity for rage was built into their biology as surely as their Force blindness was. A species trait that allowed for entering a rage state represented the opposite of everything Jedi training aimed to achieve. 10th on the list was the difficulty in recruitment and integration that the Rakata presented. Few outsiders survived visiting the Rakata homeworld of Lihan, and the species remained mostly unfamiliar with Republic laws and systems. Although a few Rakata adventurers existed in a wider galaxy, they were rarely scouts or nobles. Sometimes they appeared as Force users, but the explicit Force-blind trait listed in their species statistics prevented any potential for proper Jedi training and made their suitability for the Jedi Order impossible. As a general rule, the Jedi Order avoided recruiting Force-sensitive individuals who were perceived as dangerous, or those who were likely to be swayed to the dark side. Even without the Force-blind limitation, the Rakata's violent culture and rage-fueled nature would have made them poor candidates for an order built on peace and emotional control. Their entire cultural history was built on conquering and controlling others through the Force. Even after losing that connection, the patterns of violence and rage remained. These weren't behaviors that could be easily unlearned or suppressed through Jedi training, but fundamental aspects of how Rakata society functioned. The Jedi didn't recruit randomly from Force-sensitive populations across the galaxy. They followed careful guidelines developed over thousands of years of experience. They specifically did not recruit individuals who practiced traditions like those of the Sith, which relied heavily on the dark side. They avoided those who seemed controlling, dangerous, or likely to fall. This philosophy made perfect sense when you understood what was at stake. Every Jedi trained represented a potential weapon for either the light or the dark. A fallen Jedi didn't just lose their way, they became active threats to everything the Order protected. The galaxy had seen too many examples of powerful Force users who turned to the dark side and caused massive destruction. The evaluation was simple. The risks dramatically outweighed the uncertain potential gains. Even if a single Sith pureblood could somehow resist their nature, their culture, and their history, they would face impossible obstacles within the Jedi Order itself. The Rakata failed an even more basic test. They lacked the fundamental requirement for Jedi training. Anger control could theoretically be taught through discipline and training. However, no amount of instruction could grant access to a power that existed beyond their biological reach. The Rakata represented a cautionary tale about what happened when a species misused the Force so thoroughly that the Force itself seemed to withdraw from them. Whether their Force blindness was a natural consequence of their actions or some kind of cosmic punishment remained unknown, but the result was the same. The books make it clear that the Jedi faced an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, how a species was born determined everything. The Sith species had evolved over dozens of millennia in an environment saturated with the dark side. Their temples and structures preserved ancient knowledge passed through pure Sith blood. This wasn't about individual choice or free will. This was about a species whose very genetic code had been shaped by dark side energy for longer than most civilizations existed. Both species demonstrated that the relationship between biology, culture, and the Force was more complex than simple individual choice could account for. The Jedi Order's refusal to recruit from these species reveals something important about how they viewed their mission. They weren't trying to save every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy. They were trying to protect the galaxy itself from the threat of dark side corruption spreading through their own ranks. The Jedi understood that they couldn't fix everything or save everyone. From the Jedi's perspective, the most compassionate choice was to recognize when individuals seemed fundamentally unsuited for their path rather than subject them to what appeared to be inevitable failure and pain. Both represented impossible challenges for an order that already struggled to maintain its numbers and its principles in a galaxy that constantly tested both. The Jedi made their choice based on practical necessity as much as philosophical conviction. They chose to work with species that offered a real chance of success rather than spending their limited resources on cases that seemed doomed from the start. But the galaxy continued to change, and the line between Jedi and Sith, between light and dark, would be tested in ways the Ancient Order never imagined. The question of whether species determined destiny or choice transcended biology would echo through the centuries, as new threats emerged that challenged every assumption the Jedi had built their order upon. But these careful recruitment standards couldn't prevent the Order's collapse under its most legendary master. Learn why Yoda failed as a Jedi Master in the next video.